Story 1. Staying at my cousin's house, I noticed something on the floor that looked like a type of mold or mushroom I had never seen before. It resembled the underside of a mushroom cap with striations and a round shape. Over the next week, my imagination got the best of me. I convinced myself it was a flesh-eating virus and that it would kill me in my sleep. One day, while pondering and watching it, waiting for it to rise up and attack me, a breeze came through and the bane of my young existence fluttered. It was paper-thin, in fact, it was paper-like. I gathered my courage and touched it. It was slick and smooth. It turned out to be a cutout from a magazine, part of a school project that had been lost. It was a picture of the rear end of a polar bear. Story 2. There was an episode of Hey Arnold, where his grandpa tells a story about a train engineer who went mad and drove the train into hell. I had nightmares for weeks, and it still slightly freaks me out if I think about it now. Story 3. I was convinced something would grab my feet if I didn't jump into bed fast enough. Even now, I quietly avoid letting them hang off. Story 4. I was convinced that if I left my feet hanging off the bed, something would grab them. To this day, I sleep like a burrito because no demon deserves my toes. Story 5. I was terrified of the inside of the human body. For some reason, I went to college and studied it for 8 years. Story 6. There was a map of Quebec that hung on the wall of my third-grade classroom. Dominating the right side of the map was the Atlantic Ocean. The increasing depth of the ocean was illustrated by deepening shades of blue. I remember the top right corner of the map where the largest stretch of ocean started light sky blue at the shore, then azure, then cobalt, then ultramarine, then navy, then indigo, and finally the very top right corner of that map was dead black. Every day, I stared at that corner. I imagined the abyssal depths it hinted at, the monsters lurking in that lightless world, horrors that had never seen the sun. That map terrified me. Story 7. The song Somewhere Over the Rainbow, sung by Judy Garland in the original Wizard of Oz film, gives me chills and a feeling of dread, and I don't know why. Story 8. Dolls, especially those freakishly realistic ones, used to frighten me. My siblings would tease me with Annabelle and Chucky. It's not as bad now, but I'd still rather avoid them. Story 9. Some of you did not read Absolutely Ridiculous regarding the normal fears that adults have. I was terrified of ketchup. I couldn't be near it. The thought of it touching me repulsed me. I got some on my shoe in high school, cried, and threw away my shoes. I walked barefoot for my last 2 periods of school. Story 10. Coconuts. As she tells it, when I started crawling in an era that predated baby Gates, my mom would find the biggest, hairiest coconut she could find at the grocery store and put it on the floor anywhere she didn't want me to go. I crawl up to it and immediately engage my reverse gear. I can't stand the things to this day. Story 11. I had a recurring dream that Yosemite Sam lived under the back seat of my mom's minivan and would burn my legs with cigarettes. I dislike riding in the back seats of vans. My legs feel so exposed. Story 12. I lived across from a forest, so at night I was always scared that wolves might come out and get me before I made it to the front door. I was very frightened when I was young, and I would rush from the car to the door. Story 13. Killer bees. Trolls under bridges confused with tolls, and we panicked every time we had to stop and pay a bridge toll. Story 14. I used to have trouble going to sleep as a child. To remedy this, my mom had 2 albums that would help me fall asleep. The first was Summer Rain by Tony O'Connor. This album would lull me to sleep within the first 2 tracks. I usually couldn't even make it through track 1. It still works most of the time 20 years later. The second album was by Enigma. This album would also put me to sleep, but not like Tony's. Rather than a gentle kiss, it would terrify me into sleep. I would succumb to sleep out of sheer fear of track 8. Track 8 begins with a choir reciting the Book of Revelations in low voices. I was absolutely terrified and would force myself to sleep to escape it. Even now, I cannot listen to that song without getting chills. I am still scared of that track. Story 15. When I was very young, in daycare, there was a massive grasshopper on the wall that we all were observing. Suddenly, some kid threw a rock at it. The grasshopper jumped off the wall onto me, crawled up the outside of my dress, up my face, and then leaped from the top of my head. I cried until my mom came and picked me up. After that, I developed a severe, irrational fear of grasshoppers for a while. It's not as bad now, but they still kind of freak me out. Story 16. The idea of dying made me quite anxious. As a child, I was an atheist. It reached a point where thinking about death would leave me feeling uneasy until I realized I was being selfish for favoring life over death. Even though they are equal in the grand scheme of things, I was terrified of death solely because I did not know what it would feel like or when it would happen. Story 17. Toxic gases, due to a disturbing World War I history book I read when I was much too young. Story 18. Escalators. I was convinced that some part of my clothing would get caught in the landings, and I would be stuck or mangled. I still have the habit of hopping onto the first step and hopping off the last to avoid the landings. Story 19. Slender Man was a phenomenon when I was a kid. A couple of girls lured their friend into the woods and killed her to honor him. Freaked me out then and still does. Story 20. I was about 3 or 4 years old when we were waiting for an elevator. After the doors opened, an old man pointed to the gap between the floor and the elevator and said, "Be careful. Don't fall in there." Panicked. Even today, my heartbeat increases slightly when I step onto an elevator. Story 21. The idea that if you were caught looking out your window at night and happened to see something you weren't supposed to, you would get taken away. Story 22. When I was a kid, the older kids went to watch a movie. I insisted I could handle it, despite my mother telling me I couldn't. I escaped her grasp and ran in just as a character tore the heart out of another. I ran back out screaming and crying. It haunted me as I thought it was real. As an adult, I know it's just a scene from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and it's very much fake. I am a big Mortal Kombat fan where that happens regularly. Yet I am still scared of having my heart pulled out of my body by someone. Story 23. The music video for Black Hole Sun by Soundgarden really creeped me out when I was a kid. I saw it for the first time while hanging out in the game room, and I sprinted to the storage closet with my dog and refused to come out. I still think it's unsettling. Story 24. When I was 5 or 6, we lived in a large rental house. I remember seeing a figure standing in the corner of my room every night. I also recall many other strange experiences that felt unsettling there. I had a very active imagination as a child and was easily scared of everything. I used to run and hide from the television show The X-Files when I heard the theme song. I don't believe in ghosts, but thinking about that house still creeps me out as an adult. I even had a nightmare about it once. Story 25. My family went camping at a lake. One night, we woke up to the sound of something repeatedly hitting our tents. At first, I couldn't tell what it was because it was really dark, and I don't remember if anyone had a flashlight. My mom eventually realized what was happening. I just remember waking up and being told to run straight for the car. I don't even remember who else was still in the tent with me at that moment, but I got up and ran out. I felt swarmed with fluttering all around me. I lost my sense of direction and almost ran into the lake. I think someone grabbed me or called out for me to come to them. I eventually made it to the car, crying. After what felt like forever, making sure nothing was on me, I settled down in the car. We waited until sunrise and saw them, so many mayflies. They covered everything during the night. This event traumatized me. I really don't like flying insects. I freeze and cover my ears every time something flies by me. I can't help it. It's a gut reaction. My family loves to joke about it, and I find it funny sometimes. I think over the years it has gotten slightly better. I'm able to deal with being around some bugs. Story 26. The adults told me I would burn in hell for eternity. I lived in terror throughout my teenage years and many of my adult years. Then, for some reason, the fear went away for a while. But now that I am older, it has returned. Story 27. I would need to look into it further, but one thing that stuck with me is the heart she expressed. Especially the commercial where she talks about, "This is finally getting interesting." Terrified me more than anything as a kid. Now, still disturbing, but more entertaining. Story 28. The edge of a cornfield, where a farmhouse has a lawn and then, without a fence, a wall of corn. makes me feel very uncomfortable. I feel like something is in there, especially at dusk. Story 29. My stepfather once told me that there were baby sharks in the deep end of pools, and to this day, if I see something in the deep end, even a shadow, I kind of freak out. Story 30. I dislike swimming near pool drains to the extent that I try to avoid lanes with them or next to them. Story 31. The backs of semi-trucks swung open suddenly. Even before I saw the film Final Destination, I had a fear of them when we were on the highway. Even today, knowing that those boxes are securely locked, I try to get around them as fast as I can. Story 32. Pool drains must have scared me as a child, or I was forced to stand on one. I honestly don't remember. Even at 34, if I'm in a pool and see one, I cannot bring myself to go anywhere near it. Story 33. I can't watch E.T. I bolted out of the room in fear when that leather-like alien fell over drunk. I also have a strong fear of being dizzy. I was 4 or 5 when it developed from winding up the chains on a swing and spinning. I hated the feeling. As I got older, it worsened. I experience panic attacks if I get dizzy or have vertigo. Story 34. The old-fashioned world globes featured tiny sea monsters illustrated on them. It was horrifying to me, as they seemed like accurate representations of where sea monsters were actually located. Story 35. Dust bunnies, or whatever they are called in English, used to make me gag when I was young. I don't have a problem with them now, but I still dislike the feeling of touching them. Story 36. When I was a child, I slept with a can of paint next to my bed. Ghosts are invisible, so I thought if I threw the paint on the ghost, I would be able to see it and fight it. Seemed easy. My parents never gave me a paint can opener, but you don't think of those details when you are 5. Story 37. There was a channel in the 1990s showing otherworldly horrors beyond comprehension. Unintelligible, inexpressible, incomprehensible strange material. It looked literally alien. In fact, I thought it was aliens transmitting something to Earth. You could only see the broadcast on satellite television. Watching it for a few minutes would give me a creepy, unsettling feeling. Any longer and I would experience full-blown panic attacks, believing I was watching something I really shouldn't. After a while, the channel disappeared. To this day, I never knew what it was, but I suspect it was probably something completely mundane. Story 38. When I was very young, living in rural Wisconsin, a hot air balloon landed in our backyard. I was just a baby then, but it apparently scared me. I remember when I was 5, I saw one in the sky and immediately started crying because it scared me so much. I still have a fear of large objects in the sky. Most recently, I was at the beach to watch some fireworks, and they were much closer than I anticipated, which rattled me. Being able to look straight up and still see them freaks me out. Story 39. The bars where the wave machine is located in a swimming pool. I always assumed that is where they kept the sharks. Story 40. I was always scared my parents would build a wall of bricks around my bed and trap me inside while I was sleeping. Now I'm just claustrophobic. Story 41. I make sure my ears are covered. As a child, I was always worried that bugs would crawl into my ear, travel to my brain, and start eating it. I apologize for any anxiety this may have caused. Story 42. I was terrified of foxes. My next-door neighbor's chicken had been attacked by one, and in my 4-year-old mind, I equated them with wolves. After too many bedtime fairy tales featuring wolves, I was left with nightmares. Story 43. Looking up, I honestly thought my neck would split open or something. The clouds looked a bit scary, and I found the shapes reminded me of Mr. Maker. Story 44. Monsters in the cupboard. I've seen too many American television shows where someone is in the cupboard. Story 45. I grew up in Michigan, and my dad, 2 brothers, and I'm the youngest, would go up into the lighthouses. I was so scared of climbing those circular stairs, and many steps were broken, so we had to jump to the next one. My dad would tease me about being afraid, and to this day, I don't like stairs or heights of any kind, and I'm 68 years old. Story 46. There was a made-for-television found footage alien movie called Alien Abduction. Incident at Lake County. I thought it was real and was unable to sleep for a week. As an adult, it took me a long time to figure out what the movie was, but now, when I watch it, I still feel a sense of dread. Story 47. Tractors driving behind me, especially at night, make me feel like they will harm me for no reason other than appearing unfriendly. I tend to overlook the fact that they are operated by humans, not by the machines themselves, and that the likelihood of every single person driving a tractor wanting to harm me is very low. Story 48. I still kind of avoid mirrors when I go to shower. I used to think she would come to life while I was asleep as a kid and come out of the mirror. Story 49. As children, we were read stories about trolls that lived under bridges. The three Billy Goats gruff stood out the most to me. I would run very fast across short country bridges over creeks, afraid that a troll would emerge, ask 3 questions, and eat me if I couldn't answer correctly. Story 50. Clowns. I watched a movie called The Clown Murders and have hated them ever since. For some strange reason, I also developed a fear of octopuses. During a family trip to Daytona Beach, I was worried that my dad would be pulled under by an octopus if he swam too far out. Story 51. As a kid, I would swear I could see a predator in camouflage in my closet. I would stare at it for hours, stressing out my little kid brain. I had to sleep with my mom for weeks. To this day, if I start thinking about aliens when I'm trying to sleep, I get really scared. Especially when I visit forums like r/experiencers and think about that when I'm trying to sleep. It's freaky. Aliens are frightening. Story 52. I am 57 and I still avoid looking at mirrors in the dark. The crazy thing is, I have no idea why it scares me so much. Story 53. I watched Videodrome when I was younger. The part with the literal handgun freaked me out because of how grotesque it looked. The scene where he murdered someone on stage and the dead body's skin split open with tumors disgusted me. Story 54. I was 10 when Jaws hit the theater. I have been terrified of sharks ever since, and I know it is irrational, but there it is. Story 55. Trapdoor was on television when I was young. I used to hide behind the sofa to watch it. I blame it for my fear of spiders as an adult. Story 56. I could see a tree from my window at the bottom of a very long garden. The giant knot on it looked like a bear clutching the tree, watching me and waiting. My mind gradually transformed that fear into a monster at the bottom of the garden, waiting for me to forget so it could attack. I refused to go past the top of the garden because of it. Story 57. The car screamer jump scare video was being shown by my brother to our mom, who can handle this kind of content. They were discussing it, and out of curiosity, I asked to see it. My brother turned off the sound to make it more bearable for me, but it still scared me. I often see it in meme compilations and start to panic when I see the beginning. I can't handle jump scares or screamers. Story 58. That alien with the glowing finger is unsettling. I'm 32 years old, and I'll lose my mind if anyone tries to watch that movie around me. My husband thought it was a joke, but that alien is truly a nightmare. Story 59. Anything to do with teeth. I was a screamer as a child, and I was loud. I had to be sedated for every dental procedure until I was around 11 or 12. I would freak out every other child in the practice because they heard me screaming until I was sedated if they tried to perform the procedure while I was awake. Often, I would panic so much that my mother had to hold me in her lap, restraining me in the fetal position while they gave me a sedation shot in my shoulder. My earliest memory was when my slightly older brother started to get his first loose tooth. My grandma introduced us to the magic washcloth, which was just a warm, wet washcloth used to pull the loose tooth with less pain. She decided to demonstrate this by using it to pull out her entire set of dentures. I ran down the hallway screaming and hid for a while before they found me. The only reason I stopped needing sedation for dental work was that my dentist was fed up with me requiring sedation and decided I would just receive a local anesthetic whether I wanted it or not. As the hygienist held me down while I screamed in terror, the dentist leaned over me with the needle and said, "If you do not let me do this, I will send you to an orthodontist who will strap you down from forehead to toes, put a retractor in your mouth to keep it open, and do it whether you allow him to or not." I went immediately from fighting to freezing, and he completed the entire procedure while I was only half numb because he didn't give me enough local anesthetic, and I was too frightened to tell him it hurt. We never went back to that particular dentist, but I still get extreme anxiety in dental offices, especially when they're administering the local anesthetic. I have to keep my eyes shut, and I always warn them not to let me see the needle or I will panic. It takes, on average, 4 or 5 doses to get me fully numb for something as simple as a filling, and much more for anything more invasive like root canals or implants. Story 60 Quicksand. I lived in Scotland but watched too many westerns, I guess. There were also earwigs crawling into my ears when I slept. Story 61. What caused me to be afraid wasn't ridiculous, but I think the direction it took is. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I opened the cabinet under the kitchen sink, and an enormous blackbird flew out right into my face. It proceeded to freak out in the kitchen and started attacking me and my mom, who had run in to see what I was screaming about. My dad was working on the cabinets to install a new dishwasher. The bottom of the cabinet had a piece of wood cut out, and it was open to the basement, which we got birds in all the time. So that's how the bird got in the cabinet. My dad was at the hardware store when this happened. My mom, scared to death of birds, took me, and we sat on the basement steps to hide from the bird and wait for him to get home. One would think I'd have been left with a lifelong fear of birds, but the brain is strange. For the last 47 years, when I open any kitchen cabinet, I expect something to fly into my face. When I have to deal with the undersink cabinets, I get a borderline panic attack. When I lived alone, I had to fix my kitchen sink plumbing, and that was a whole ordeal for me. In the meantime, I'm regularly dive-bombed by angry birds at my bird feeder, and I'm just indifferent. I guess the silver lining is that if something ever does fly out of a cabinet and into my face, I'll be ready for it. Story 62. Vacuum cleaners. At least I'm not the only one, and I find comfort watching my cat, shutting myself in any kind of cupboard entirely. Thank you, Clive Staples. Story 63. Our old giant cast iron coal furnace in the basement had a pair of round sight windows. It had been converted to gas, and when the burners would kick on, the windows would glow red like a pair of angry, evil eyes. Story 64. Absolutely ridiculous variations exist, particularly in the Final Destination movies. They have scarred me like no other. There are all the obvious scenes, such as the plane crash, the roller coaster incident, and the dangerously irrational act of driving behind a log truck on the highway. However, I will never walk near a lawn mower for fear of a rock flying through my head. The tanning bed? I never wanted to use one in the first place, and I never will. You couldn't pay me to undergo laser eye surgery. I don't care how bad my eyesight gets. I hesitate to attempt anything remotely related to gymnastics, fearing I might break my spine in half. I genuinely wince while watching the Olympics. Story 65. I was about 5 or 6 years old when I awoke with sleep paralysis and was certain that RoboCop was standing over me, watching me sleep. I screamed, but only my dad was home, and he usually slept with earplugs because my mom kept the television on. The next day, I lost my voice from screaming and sobbing for what felt like hours. He didn't do anything besides stand over me, still and staring. RoboCop still gives me the creeps to this day. Story 66. My brother grabbed my foot while I ran up the basement steps that had no wall. I slipped, hit my face on the steps, slid back down, and twisted my ankle when it got caught between the steps. So, childhood trauma and injuries. Also, I can't stand near storm drains or shower drains, as inspired by Stephen King's It. Story 67. Busta Rhymes had a music video that scared me. I think I can watch it now, but it was the one where everything was colorful, and they zoomed in on his face with vibrant colors. He was chasing someone around the house. Then there was Janet's video with the spider coming out of her mouth or her eating it. Story 68. There was a rumor about a train called the Yellow Cab that would be operating on the train tracks at night. If it found you near the tracks, it would abduct and torture you. Story 69. I cannot let my feet touch the floor when I am watching a scary movie. I might be an adult, but I am still wary of monsters under the sofa getting me during a horror film. Story 70. There is a game show called The Cube in the United Kingdom. I was extremely scared of the masked woman who demonstrated how to play each game. She had no face, and that terrified me. Story 71. The movie Freaky Friday, explores the concept of being forced to live as another person without anyone knowing. Story 72. In the early 90s, when I was about 3, I was terrified of the milkman's float as it drove around our neighborhood at 5 in the morning. As it was electric-powered, it sounded like a ghost train. I would hide under the covers, waiting for it to stop. Milk floats no longer exist where I live, but I still get a little chill down my spine when electric cars make a similar whoosh noise as they reverse. Story 73. A bowl of mashed potatoes with hairs in it. For some unknown reason, my older brother would run to the bathroom when he heard me brushing my teeth and shout out the most grotesque things in hopes that I would gag and throw up while I was still brushing my teeth. 52 years later, it still haunts me. Story 74. There was an episode of Home and Away where one of the characters, Alma, was having a nervous breakdown. She saw the ghost of another character, Bobby Fischer, emerge from the fridge. It scared me, and I wouldn't enter the kitchen alone for weeks. Story 75. That episode of Round the Twist when the boy becomes pregnant after urinating on a tree still haunts me to this day. Story 76. Everything about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory terrified me. Children lured in by sweets faced terrifying fates such as drowning in chocolate, exploding like a balloon, or being sucked into a ceiling fan. Don't even get me started on the Oompa Loompa. At the tunnel scene, I was done. All my sister had to do to bring me to tears was start singing Oompa Loompa. Story 77. I was terrified that Jumanji would somehow find me and force me to play it. My sibling encouraged it by drumming on things when I couldn't see them. I still have a little moment of panic when I hear the drums. I still love the movie, though. Story 78. That drowning scene in the movie Beethoven still gives me a chill when I see a ball floating in a pool. Not every child who falls in is lucky enough to be rescued by a Saint Bernard. Story 79. Introducing myself to strangers can be challenging due to social anxiety about not being liked and accepted, along with feelings of shyness. Although it's not as overwhelming today, I still experience it. Story 80. Clowns. It sounds silly and normal, but I was never afraid of clowns until one day I was. I lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone. Parents and their friends allowed us to roam around and go to the park by ourselves when we were about 8 years old. One day, as the sun started to set, a group of teenagers wearing clown masks, like the ugly Halloween ones, chased us for about an hour, screaming and laughing. Back then, there were no cell phones to call for help, as it was 2008, and my parents were not inclined to intervene. Imagine my fear in 2016 when people started dressing as clowns again and chasing others around. Story 81. Bagpoos specifically refers to the toys coming to life after the shop closed. It was the way they moved. Story 82. Impact events. I was afraid a comet or asteroid would suddenly slam into Earth, and that would be the end for us. Today, of course, I know these events are extremely rare, specifically the planet killer types. But now I realize we might see it coming for months, yet we would not be able to do anything about it. Story 83. As a child, I was terrified of the idea that if I didn't turn the light off just right before going to bed, something awful would happen. I believed a monster would sneak into my room if I left even the tiniest crack of light. It still freaks me out sometimes, even though I know it's ridiculous now. Story 84. Gum. I dislike it. It makes me feel unwell. I cannot tolerate it, especially when people brush their teeth around me. It is so unappealing, and I particularly dislike it in movies. There always seems to be a toothbrush scene. Even typing this makes me feel nauseous. Story 85. When I was little, my stepmom took us to visit her family's farm. Her cousin was around my age, and I thought he was cool, so I believed everything he said. He told me many stories about Bigfoot, including one about how they fist-fought one night and Bigfoot nearly killed him. I was gullible beyond belief and absolutely terrified. I couldn't sleep since there was a two-blade window fan in the guest room, and I kept scaring myself, thinking it was Bigfoot's huge eyes watching me. As if that wasn't enough, there was also a little patch of softball-sized white mushrooms growing under a tree near the house. My cousin told me these were Sasquatch eggs. I totally believed it. I sat on the little swing set nearby, staring at them, thinking they'd hatch soon, and more killer Bigfoots would come out. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, rushed over, and stomped the mushrooms to pieces, instantly collapsing into tears of shame because I destroyed the baby Bigfoots. Now I'm in my 30s, and I'm staunchly pro-choice. Stomp those mushrooms, little me. Story 86. Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds influenced my childhood. My parents had a vinyl copy, and I would listen to it around age 6. The booklet contained artwork, and the Martian machines were both terrifying and grotesque. The description of their seeking beams and heat lasers frightened me deeply. Now, when I hear those sounds, like the strange whistling, it brings back those fears. I would hide from those beams in my parents' bathroom, under the sink between a pillar and a shelf, as it was the only place where light wouldn't reach. I was also scared of raptors, reminiscent of Jurassic Park. When trying to sleep, if I thought I heard something, I would stop breathing and lie completely still. This fear has now expanded to include zombies. I have had nightmares about being trapped in a labyrinth with both zombies and raptors. I remember the shadows moving across the window, standing completely still for 5 minutes while making no noise at all. Story 87. Ursula the Sea Witch. I know she was meant to be scary, but she terrified me to my core. She was so large that she took up the whole screen and was mean, wanting to take Ariel's voice. I was 6 years old, and it was the first movie I remember seeing in the theater. Over 35 years later, and I am still somewhat afraid of Ursula. She is big and mean and still wants to take Ariel's voice. Story 88. My mom thought it was a great idea to let me, a 7-year-old, watch Jurassic Park. I was already an anxious and easily frightened child. To this day, I am deeply uncomfortable with the idea of dinosaurs. Even when I take my kids to the museum, I get chills in the dinosaur exhibits. This is completely irrational, but I am still a bit freaked out by the replicas and fossils. Story 89. I cannot explain it, but as a child I was scared of swinging objects. Swing sets, the punching bags at karate class, and my dad's planet and astronaut models that he hangs from the ceiling. Something about how, once it starts swinging, it is difficult to make it entirely stop moving. Felt like looking at infinity. I still feel the urge to hold swinging objects still. Story 90. Muppets, puppets, all of it. Falser. Alf, the big red dog from Sesame Street. Absolutely terrifying. I'm happy to report that at 44 I no longer cry, at least. Also, Hans, my hedgehog from Jim Henson's Storyteller, was and remains the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. That hedgehog prince makes me want to tear my skin off and scream. After I saw that show, I never slept in the dark again. Thank you, Jim Henson, for instilling all my irrational fears. Story 91. When I was 5 or 6 years old, someone got me a life-size Barbie doll and a talking baby doll for my birthday or Christmas. I was absolutely horrified. I was convinced they watched me while I slept. I covered their heads with a blanket. Then I started begging, please put them in the closet. I can't tell you how long it took before I believed they were moving in the closet and looking through the cracks. After all of that, they were given away. Story 92. When I was little, an adult told me that earwigs are named earwigs because they crawl into your ears and use their pincers to pinch your eardrum and stay inside. I still freak out near any bug that resembles an earwig. I'm in my 30s. Story 93. Pool drains have always unsettled me, especially after a late-night movie where I was convinced piranhas would come up and attack me. I still don't trust pool drains. Story 94. Drains, especially in bathtubs and pools, have always intrigued me. As a child, I believed that a monster lived in them and would pull me down. Although I no longer fear them as I did then, large drains and vents in swimming pools still make me uneasy. Story 95. The Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland. I was terrified of it from about 3 to 8 years old. We went to Disneyland every summer and sometimes during Christmas break too, and my dad would get so mad at me for being scared of a low-key, non-thrill ride. I managed to keep it together by the time I was around 8, but to be honest, I still don't love that ride. The animatronics were overwhelming for me as a child. Story 96. Mr. Toast. an animated piece of evil toast that lived in the floor vents of the house. We had a brown reading pillow that was vaguely shaped like toast, and I was afraid of that too. My parents could not figure out where my fear of the toast originated. They asked me about it when I was an adult. I watched a claymation show. I'm not sure if it was a movie or an episode, and it featured a very dark and creepy scene with a big thunderstorm. A scientist accidentally animated a piece of toast, which turned out to be evil and on the loose. My imagination took it from there. I was also terrified of baths for a while because I was convinced that lava would start pouring out of the faucet and burn me alive. That fear stemmed from a scene in Dante's Peak where the protagonist turns on the tap, and a stream of orange, sulfuric volcanic water emerges. I thought it was lava. Story 97. Candyman and Bloody Mary. There is not enough money in the world that can get me to even talk into a mirror, let alone say those names. Story 98. When I was a child on a camping trip, a friend told a scary story about the Jersey Devil. At the time, I was afraid of being eaten at night. However, whenever I am deep in the woods or in the middle of nowhere, I still have that feeling of being watched. Story 99. I disliked forklifts in home improvement stores. Their loud noises made me anxious, and I was convinced they would harm me. Around the same time, I frequently dreamed of a rogue train engine that would chase me and kill me. Now I'm 30, and I still have a mild fear of semi-trucks hunting me down. The Stephen King movie Maximum Overdrive is genuinely my worst nightmare and has terrified me. Additionally, I dislike the film E.T. That creepy alien character unsettles me. Story 100. I still get spooked when I feel someone touching me in the middle of the night while I'm trying to sleep, even though nobody else is in the room. Story 101. Slender Man. I was terrified of that character as a child. My friend and I would often watch those fake Slender Man videos on the internet. It didn't help that I lived next to the woods, so I was convinced for months that Slender Man lived there. I used to cry when my mom let the cat outside because I always thought Slender Man would harm him. Story 102. I had a dream in the crib of the Swedish chef absolutely terrorizing the Sesame Street Twiddlebugs. Story 103. I find clowns terrifying. I had an aunt who had clowns everywhere in her home. Pictures, toys, and figurines. I hated visiting. Story 104. Bigfoot lived in my basement, and if I turned off the lights and didn't run up the stairs quickly enough, he would jump out and get me. To this day, I still don't like Bigfoot costumes or merchandise. Story 105. The bedroom closet door was left open at night. Call me fearful, but ever since I was a child, I have been afraid of keeping doors open due to a random nightmare I had as a kid. I believe it is likely related to past trauma. Story 106. When I was about 4 years old, I had a recurring dream. There was a mountain with a dreamlike atmosphere, and I was running up it when I started falling, hearing strange voices and unintelligible speech. Then I drowned. Each time, I woke up with a cold sweat on my forehead. Story 107. A volcano erupts, surrounding the land with flowing lava, and I feel trapped and unable to escape. This fear began when I was a child in the 1960s watching old Tarzan movies and Disney nature films. I also read a book in elementary school about the volcano Paracutin in Mexico, which suddenly emerged in a cornfield. I was terrified that a volcano would appear in our backyard in Michigan and encircle our house with lava. I realize now that this concern was absolutely ridiculous. While I am not consciously scared of volcanoes anymore, I now live in Nebraska, where there is minimal volcanic activity. However, after all these years, I still occasionally have a stress dream about being surrounded by lava. 20 years ago, I visited Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and took a long hike through a vast landscape covered with ancient lava flows. I eventually reached an old crater and, after an hour on the trail, I began to feel stressed. Story 108. Clowns. I had an unfortunate accidental viewing of IT when I was 4 or 5, which caused me to panic every time I encountered a clown in person. It was made worse when my grandfather gifted me a 2-foot-tall marionette of a clown that hung in the corner of my room until I buried it in my closet behind my dragon plushies. To this day, I know intellectually that clowns are just people, but I still find myself leaning into survival instincts whenever I come across one. Mimes fall into the same category. Story 109. My older brother picked Tremors for our weekly movie trip one day. My mom saw the PG-13 rating and figured it was fine. For years, every time the lights went out in movie theaters, my feet came up off the ground. Even at sleepovers, I had to sit cross-legged on the couch when we watched a movie with the lights off. Now, after all those years, it has become such a habit that whenever I watch anything, I have to sit cross-legged or with my legs tucked. Story 110. I was deathly afraid of dogs when I was young. I had to go to therapy for it because it was so bad that when I would see a dog, I would rather run onto a highway than walk past the dog. It got better, but I stayed away from dogs, and the fear remained until I was about 13. I was still afraid, but now I was able to keep my composure. I am 18 now, and I have no problem around dogs anymore. I moved out to the countryside, so there is not a home without a dog anywhere. I can walk past a dog just fine and pet it. However, it's when they bark loudly and jump on their hind legs to get closer to you that still gets my heart racing. Even though I am not really scared and understand they are not going to hurt me, it's just a gut reaction that makes me flinch a bit when they bark loudly. Story 111. Honestly, for my entire life, every time I look in the mirror, I've been subtly scared of it doing something that I'm not doing. It's kind of background noise at this point, but I still think about it all the time. I've even turned the mirror around a couple of times in my life because I was convinced it was going to happen. Story 112. I jumped into the pool at the local swimming facility and sank. Thankfully, I was fine, but I have always disliked water since. Story 113. When I was young, I was really terrified of aliens. I couldn't even look at the cover of the book, Communion. I often pondered whether my real family had been abducted and replaced by aliens in human suits. Being afraid of aliens at 6 to 8 years old isn't too ridiculous, though. However, there was one particular thing that would happen when I was young that involved aliens, and it was the worst by far, deepening my fear each time it happened. It didn't happen every night, but it occurred pretty regularly, probably more times than I even woke up for, since I have always slept heavily. Some nights, I would wake up and all the lights would be out, including the hallway light I had left on so I could see my room while I was falling asleep. Now, though, the room would be completely dark, and I would feel something at the foot of my bed. Every time this happened, I would clamp shut my eyes and start repeating to myself, trying to calm down. Just keep your eyes closed, and it will go away. But it wouldn't. It never did, not until the noises started. Guttural, labored, almost distressed sounds were definitely coming from whatever was at the end of my bed. The sound was certainly biological, but it didn't sound human. It also sounded wrong, like it was something that wasn't supposed to be, while also being vaguely familiar. Of course, in my groggy, panicked state, it was difficult to identify why it might have sounded familiar, until I inevitably realized that it was just our little Lhasa Apso puppy, curled happily at my feet, snoring like he'd made sleep apnea an Olympic event. This good boy had a deformed chin and neck, something about him having been the runt, and when he breathed normally, he made snorting sounds like a fluffy little pig. When he slept, the sound was dramatic. And for some reason, my brain would never remember, it's just the dog. When I woke up, my mind always went to aliens first. To this day, I have a hard time sleeping in the same room as someone snoring, even though I snore worse than anyone I know. Brains are silly. Story 114. I was terrified of spider webs as a child. Not the spiders, just the webs, all because of a nightmare I had where I got stuck in one. Even now, if I see a large web or accidentally walk into one, I practically have a panic attack. Story 115. There was an opening to a cave across a field that faced my bedroom window, and I always felt like I would see some grotesque creature crawl out of it one day. I also saw the movie The Descent when I was too young. Story 116. After watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I was terrified that the aliens were going to come for me. Story 117. I convince myself that every time my hair touches my ears, it's a spider that has laid eggs in my ear and is crawling out for some sunlight. I cannot stop thinking about it until I clean my ears or the tingling from paranoia stops. Story 118. I used to have nightmares and fears that a character from Five Nights at Freddy's was waiting for me in the hallway to chase me as a kid. At my grandmother's house, I imagined Freddy Fazbear hiding next to my door, ready to chase me down the stairs. It only happened at my grandmother's place, nowhere else. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.